The religions and mythologies of the world today are treated as completely different and unrelated, but they do tell a cohesive story of the world through their metaphors and of the relationship we have with the entities that we today refer to as angels, but who we once called the many gods found in the polytheistic pantheons. So what are these angels and why did we stop calling them gods? In the ancient world, the different cultures had many different gods, but they were all believed to extend from the same primal source, with the gods often being separated from that source by several generations. Today, much of the Western world at least has adopted monotheism, which is the idea that there is just one supreme god. This is the premise of Christianity, Islam, and before either of those, Judaism. But it's important to remember that Judaism didn't erase the other gods entirely. In Judaism, one of the names they use for their one true god is the Hebrew Elohim, but this is the same word used to describe the gods of other nations, and even the divine beings that are meant to assist the one true God in his plan. The best example of this is in Psalm 82, a poetic passage from the Old Testament which explains the story of the war in heaven. Here, God, from the Hebrew Elohim, is described as standing among the other gods, which is also translated from Elohim. The Old Testament God himself even seems to refer to these other gods in the very first story of the book of Genesis in the 6 days of creation. Here on the 6th day, God, Elohim, says that he will make man in their image, using very plural language to describe the other divine beings around him. The Bible makes it very clear that these gods are the gods of other nations. As in Psalm 82, they are described as leading the nations astray and favoring the wicked. The Old Testament even refers to some of the gods of the other religions by their name, such as the Canaanite god Baal. This was a god that the Israelites knew well because of their close proximity to the Canaanites who lived in the land of Israel before they took it over. Other gods of different pantheons are alluded to as well, but they're often given symbolic names or other forms within the story, reducing their divinity and making it clear that there is only one true God. So what are these divine beings and how did they get their place over the nations? In the Jewish tradition, there are many texts over the last 3,000 years that all give small snippets of what is going on in the heavenly realm, where these angels are known to negotiate what they can do with their people, amongst themselves, and with the one true God. It's not until much more recently that there was an attempt made to write down an explanation of these angels in a more direct form. This was done by Jewish Kabbalist Chaim Vital, who helped transcribe the teachings of Kabbalist Isaac Luria, from which today we have Lurianic Kabbalah. In their work titled The Book of Reincarnation, the nature of the guardian angels is explained with a metaphor of growing mountains, bodies of water, and trees, which I will paraphrase here with some explanations. According to the Book of Reincarnation, every aspect of this world has a corresponding aspect above, which means that nothing can appear below without an angelic minister above overseeing it. The great and high mountains of this earth, in this case representing large nations of people, have designated ministering princes above, one for each mountain. According to the relative height of a lower mountain to another, so too is the status of its corresponding minister above. So the bigger and mightier the nation of people, the greater the power of their god. It is known that all actions or structures of the heavens mirror those in the earth below, or as they say in esoterica, as above, so below. This is to say that our interactions on one level affect every other level, with the actions of the angels affecting us down here, and us down here affecting what happens to the angels. These mountains or people groups grow day by day from the time of creation, but their growth is imperceptible. Likewise, there are mountains that grow and strengthen, and this is the proportion of the greatness or weakness of their angelic prince appointed above them. At times, the prince of a given mountain is completely removed from his position, and then also the mountain below, or its people, loses its distinction and is absorbed into another mountain, ceasing to be recognized independently and receiving the angel of another nation that they are now considered a part of. You can imagine this as two nations becoming so closely related that a smaller one is eventually absorbed into the larger one, or that two nations of equal size can slowly merge together and their angels work together as well. At other times, the governance of a mountain's prince is partially revoked and split, half remaining with him and half going to another prince. Then below, the people split into two groups or nations as well. You will sometimes see a large boulder that has split exactly in two, not because of any soil in between, but because the rock itself has cracked and split, indicating that the people themselves have chosen to divide. The Book of Reincarnation also uses the metaphor of watery springs. In this case, the springs are waters that represent how the people below are affected by the blessings of rain that their angels give them. These springs don't represent the entirety of the people, but the people who are blessed among the nation that the angels give divine blessings to. And while an angel may govern the people as a whole, it's these people that they have a relationship with that exchanges spiritual energy. When a spring or well becomes sealed or dries up, its corresponding force above also ceases. At times, a new spring emerges on the earth previously non-existent. This indicates that above, a new supernal light or soul has been activated to elevate spiritual energy towards its angel. Finally, the Book of Reincarnation talks about this relationship between humans and angels with the metaphor of a tree. According to the Book of Reincarnation, when a tree falls or withers, its corresponding upper force is also diminished. Even when a leaf falls from a tree below, some measure of power is lost from the upper minister at that moment. This indicates that the way for one angel to kill another is not to actually have a battle up in heaven, but to have a battle upon the earth, fighting each other through their people groups and trying to remove the ones that have the spiritual connection in order to erase that people's relationship with their god. Already, you can see how this makes sense not just to the ideas of Judaism, but really the spiritual ideas of the world religions and mythologies as a whole, which all ultimately stem from the same basic practice: ancestor worship and star worship. In ancient times, the most obvious forms of worship were for the lights in the sky and for the ancestors of the people. When it comes to the lights in the sky, the evidence is obvious. Even as far back as ancient Egypt, the supreme god of the universe was the sun, known as Ra. In the various pantheons, other gods would appear representing Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury, with us adopting those names for the planets from the Roman pantheon of gods. In addition to this, however, you also find the distinct worship of ancestors in these different cultures. It makes sense that early on, humans would latch on to the sun as some sort of cosmic entity to worship, but it also makes sense that they would begin doing this with their own ancestors as well. A likely inspiration for this would probably be dreams, where humans would be able to experience seeing someone who was already dead. In early parts of human history, tribes likely believed that this was a direct contact with a dead ancestor, with the theory of dreams being that the people travel in their sleep spiritually. Over time, this kind of idea would encourage people to pray to their dead ancestors, particularly their dead fathers who died in battle protecting their clans. As time went on, however, more and more generations would be added to the list of heroes, and inevitably these people groups would not just be praying to the first father of their tribe that they have recorded, but also his sons and other notable figures within their history. Over time, these different historical figures would blend together, often sharing the same name. And over hundreds and thousands of years, this would eventually turn into devout worship of a large people group. Suddenly, what you would have is all these different nations popping up with stories of their great ancestors and how they helped get them to where they are today, both on the battlefield in life and also as a spirit guiding them from above. With each of these groups having crazy stories about how their own ancestor gods were involved with the wars of other gods representing other peoples. The practice of ancestor worship is still something held today in Japan, China, Latin America, and Africa, where this tradition still holds strong. These systems aren't separate from the existing religions, but rather the two are combined, with the more recent ancestor spirits of the people being just intermediaries that help the current generation get in contact with the higher spirits and even the gods above them. In these systems, the dead often exist in spirit only as long as they are being prayed to, remembered, and given gifts. Gifts that we would call sacrifices or offerings if given to a god instead of a ghost of a grandparent. This is very similar to what the Book of Reincarnation explained, because if these people leaving sacrifices for their own grandparents were to pass away, the spirits of their grandparents would finally move on as well. Just like with the metaphor of a tree losing its leaf below and its spirit being affected in the world above. There are examples of the gods being the ancestors of the people groups all over the world, but the most interesting of these is in the Greek mythology, as it's corroborated by the Bible in a way that confirms their ancestors weren't a true god in the way we think of God today, but a human ancestor. In Greece, the most powerful god of the pantheon is Zeus. However, that didn't make Zeus the god that loved the humans the most, or even a god who the humans were particularly fond of. In Greek mythology, after overthrowing their parents, the Olympian gods decide to make humans to do the labor for the gods, such as growing food. It's not Zeus who makes the humans, however, but the god Prometheus. Now, in the Greek myths, Prometheus isn't just the creator of humans as a whole, but he is later shown to be the ancestor of the Greeks himself. According to Greek mythology, since Zeus did not have a love for the humans the way Prometheus had, Zeus decided to let the humans die in a massive flood. The only reason they were saved was because Prometheus warned his own son Deucalion that he should build a boat in order to escape. From here, the other humans are created through the simple act of throwing pebbles across the land to grow different peoples. But Deucalion himself becomes the father of Helen, who is the patriarchal ancestor of the Hellenistic people, the Greeks. What's interesting here is that this story doesn't just match the story of Noah's Ark in the book of Genesis with the building of an ark in order to avoid a flood, but it also parallels some of the genealogical information that surrounds Noah after the flood. In the Bible, in the time after the flood, we get a table of nations with 70 different people groups, starting with the 3 sons of Noah. These 3 sons are presented as the ancestors of the Europeans, the Africans, and the Shemites, or who we today would call the Semitic people. The father of the largely European nations is Japheth. Among his many descendants is Yavan, who is generally connected to the descendant of Helen, Yah. But the similarities don't end there, as Japheth also appears to be a member of the Greek pantheon. It's important to remember that in the ancient Hebrew that the Bible was written in, there were no vowel markers. Because of that, the patriarch Japheth is actually just spelled YPT, and there's no way to know how it was actually pronounced in the ancient past. To the ancient Greeks reading the Old Testament, this would have read as YPT, or Yapatis, the father of Prometheus himself. This indicates that the Greek mythology and other mythologies account for the history of the people, tracing their lineage back to historical leaders who had been deified in their myths. In the ancient times, these ancestors were the beginning of a great cosmic being made up of many souls that were believed to guide their people. This wasn't something the ancients believed happened just naturally either, but rather the elevation of angels to the massive size of a god was seen as something the angels and humans guided together. This was done through ancient secret societies that existed all over the world, known as mystery schools. While a god in mythology often takes on the story representing his people's history, his story often represents how he himself ascended to godhood. The most ancient known example of this is from ancient Egypt with the story of Osiris. Osiris is the first king of Egypt and the founder and ruling god of the land. After traveling the world, Osiris was said to return to Egypt to find his brother Set waiting there with a gift, a chest that he would give to the god who could most perfectly fit inside of it. Osiris falls for this trick, going inside after the other gods all find that they are either too big or too small, only for Set to close the lid on Osiris and drown him in the river when Osiris fits perfectly within it. After this, Set further makes sure that Osiris can't be revived by dismembering him into 14 pieces. Already, you can see that this is not the story of a god as we imagine it, but just a powerful figure upon the earth, one who can still be killed and become a spirit. Here, the word god is used by the ancient cultures to reflect how the civilization itself has a controlling effect on the earth, with the only other gods being other great civilizations that have also risen to power. But one god could kill another god the way civilizations could destroy each other. What's interesting, however, is that Osiris is pieced back together by his wife Isis, but only long enough to impregnate her with her son Horus, who ends up defeating Set and taking back the throne. The metaphor here is that the people of Egypt were defeated by a foreign people, as Set was actually known as the god of foreigners, and more specifically, the equivalent of the god of the northern desert, then known as the land of Canaan, which the Egyptians had frequent struggles with. Where this connects to the angels is that after his death, Osiris becomes what we would think of as a real god, as he becomes the ruler of the underworld, or the afterlife. Here, he judges the spirits that passed to the dead as worthy or unworthy of advancing to paradises. Meanwhile, on Earth, his son Horus is said to become the supreme god ruling over the world. Here, we get the key story of how spirits, or what we would today call ghosts, worked on the civilizational scale. Instead of one person dying traumatically and becoming a singular spirit of power, an entire culture is depicted as being attacked, and this leads to a spiritual presence in the afterlife of those souls. This was not just a myth to the ancient cultures, but rather it was authentically believed and acted upon that you could align yourself with your ancestor spirit and essentially give him your power by performing a ritual recreating his death. In Egypt, this was done for the royals and upper classes who would play the story of Osiris dying, then Isis reviving him, in order to simulate a near-death experience. Many ancient cultures would push this practice to extremes by having their initiates run 25 miles first, or undergo intense heat in a sweat lodge, or even use different kinds of mind-altering substances that simulates the rush of hormones you experience when you die. This was meant to align your body with the will of your god for the duration of your life, letting them act through you. Meanwhile, in the afterlife, your spirit would join theirs, with the pharaohs of Egypt being seen as dying and becoming part of Osiris himself due to this death and resurrection ritual. Esoterica hints at the idea that these spirits are only meant to work in this space for so long before allowing their light to rise higher and their darkness to ascend to the human level to be filtered yet again, something explored in later spiritual systems like Gnosticism. For the gods, these rituals would allow for them to essentially maintain their identity and presence in the upper world, with new humans joining them almost as a sort of fuel that prolongs their existence and maintains their power. This isn't always seen as a bad thing, but it's always meant to be a temporary thing even at this scale, with Judaism and Christianity both pointing to an upcoming age where the intermediaries are no longer supposed to mislead the humans, and instead we will be guided by the one true God directly. Outside of Judaism, each of these cultures had their own name for these angels that they called gods, and though their pantheons did differ, you do see a lot of similarities between them. In the original Samaritan Bibles, it's explained that after the flood, the nations were divided based on the number of the sons of God, with a table of nations showing this being 70 nations. This is the genealogy of Noah's descendants that broke off into the 70 tribes that are well known to correlate to real peoples. This matches the Canaanite religion that the Israelites grew out of, where the chief god El had 70 sons called the sons of God. In the Canaanite writings, these were called the Ben Elim, and in the closely matching Hebrew, the sons of God were called the B'nai Elohim, with the Hebrew term really just being derived from the Canaanite term. This was done in the Bible to represent the nations as being misled by their patron gods, with each of these cultures having their own distinct traditions and angels watching over them. The similarities aren't just with the Canaanite pantheon that Judaism was close to, however, and in fact, these sons of God closely match the pantheons of other cultures around the world. In the biblical retelling of the sons of God, the father god El essentially becomes Noah, with 70 descendants being his sons of Elim. In the Canaanite pantheon, the most important of these are the three brothers Baal, Yam, and Mot, who each match Noah's three sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Shem is the ancestor of the Shemitic or Semitic people, which descends down to include the Israelites themselves. Before Israel, these different groups were mostly characterized by their worship of Baal, though that did bleed into other family lines, and they sometimes had other patron gods unrelated to him. Baal was a thunder god of the desert who, in his stories, had to conquer his brothers Yam and Mot to become the supreme god. Yam is the god of the sea, who Baal defeats first. Mot is the god of the underworld, which Baal descends to in order to defeat Mot and finally become king. Here, he has his own death and resurrection, thanks to his wife healing him after Mot first defeats him. You may notice that this is similar to the story of Set and Osiris, with Set being the god of the desert and thunderstorms that Egyptians equated with the Canaanite god Baal. Mot, meanwhile, is the god of the underworld, just like Osiris. Mot, as the underworld god, appears to be a parallel for Noah's other son, Ham, who is the father of the Egyptian peoples, as well as other cultures that have connections to the underworld god. Mot even seems to be a parallel to the Egyptian Ma'at, which represents the nature of goodness in the underworld as a divine figure that helps Osiris judge the souls of the dead. This leaves the third son, Japheth, who is already known to be the father of the Europeans, particularly the Greeks, as discussed earlier in the video. They are described in the Bible as a maritime and seafaring people, which makes a lot of sense with Greek history. In Greece, Zeus, the dominant god, isn't their ancestor god, but instead, Zeus is a god who rules by force, looking more like Baal, who conquered his brothers in battle. Zeus, like Baal, has a brother of the sea named Poseidon instead of Yam, as well as a brother of the underworld named Hades instead of Mot. Further over in Rome, we have this exact pattern again, with Zeus or Baal being known as Jupiter and having a brother of the sea named Neptune and a brother of the underworld named Pluto. Thus, the spread of Zeus worship and thunder god worship in general into Europe seems to reflect the story of Baal defeating the ocean god Yam and his rule spreading culturally. In Judaism, these figures are reduced to patriarchs that are just ancestors of different people, but they correlate to the actual gods that these different people groups worshipped. But at some point, the mythological texts all point to a great fall from heaven and a new rule being established. Now, in Judaism and Christianity, they both refer to a fall from heaven, but in both cases, the two seem to be referring to the history of each other. Judaism is a monotheization of the world religions, and we explored how the divine gods of other religions were reduced to less divine figures like patriarchs in the Old Testament. The divine aspects of these gods are retained in the stories of the sons of God, who are the angels that misled the world into thinking they were the supreme beings. In Judaism, these other figures are all considered to have a fall from grace at some point, even after being some of God's favorite angels. In the Bible, certain gods like Baal are depicted very specifically as being evil, misleading the nations and even the Israelites into child sacrifice. Modern Christianity tends to adopt the mainstream Jewish interpretations of the Old Testament rather closely, but it's important to remember that Christianity was founded on the idea that the true fallen angel was the angel of the Pharisees. In the book of John chapter 8, Jesus specifically refers to this entity as the devil, the father of lies, and the one who the Pharisees work on behalf of. This was not the father of Jesus, who he claims to be the God Most High, but an angel Jesus refers to as the prince of this world. In Judaism, this angel is known as Metatron, who is claimed to be their great ancestor, Enoch. Enoch, interestingly, can be translated as initiate, and his story is placed within the genealogy of Set, an important figure in the story of Cain and Abel. In this story, Cain kills Abel, and he is replaced by his brother Set, paralleling the death and rebirth narrative where initiates join an ancestor spirit. Once again, we have this idea of a specific initiation system and story that leads to the creation of this ancestor spirit. Because Enoch was initiated much later than the other angels, he's referred to as the youth and the lad, and he is described as taking over the heavenly realm at the start of the fall of the other angels, who descended to earth to take human wives. This is why in the New Testament, the devil is described as the one who controls the earth, while Jesus himself is the one who is described as experiencing a more physical fall into creation, at least until the book of Revelation, where both are described as having a descent into the material. This is why the devil can even offer Jesus all the riches in the world, and why he says this figure can blind the mind to make people unbelievers. According to Jesus, the prince of this world only has a certain amount of time before he will be cast out and judged, however, something that aligns with Jewish and Gnostic traditions. In the later Jewish tradition, the figure of Metatron is explained as only being meant to rule for so long, until the Messianic soul can be complete, a total of 6,000 years. The picture painted is of a figure who is able to hold a position of a certain number of years before reaching a completion point that requires him to fall to the earth, just like the angels before him. This parallels the story of Jesus, where his initial death on the cross is used to plant a seed, making him the first fruit with others to follow as a new ancestor spirit. The book of Revelation hints at this further, with Jesus being presented as a slain lamb returning to the heavens for rule. Here, the fifth seal of the apocalypse cannot be unleashed on the humans until the proper number of souls have died, martyred in the name of the one true religion. This is a constant theme in Christianity, the idea that there will be persecution of Christians, and that somehow this persecution is what leads to these souls becoming martyrs who join Jesus in the afterlife, becoming the most holy of holies in the heavens. In Gnosticism, the Old Testament God, or the angel of the Pharisees, is treated as an ignorant entity that wants to be the only God and traps the light of humans in the material world so that they have to worship him. This mirrors the accusation from Jesus in the New Testament, where he claims that the Pharisees lock the doors to heaven and won't even enter themselves. In Gnosticism, this plays out not just with the Old Testament God, here known as the Demiurge, but also his other minions who simply want to maintain power in the cosmic realm for as long as possible. Jesus here is presented as similar to the New Testament, being the entity who descends and takes on human form so that he can help people realize that they are trapped in a lower realm and get them to escape. If you've made it this far into the video, you likely crave more information like this, connecting the different mythologies and religions around the world to reveal their true story. If so, consider signing up for our Patreon or YouTube memberships. There, you'll get 1 week early access to each video we make generally. But for this first month to get things started, we have 3 videos out in advance with 4 more lectures of early drafts for our next videos, so there's hours of content for learning. Check out this full list of subjects covered so far. If any of those interest you, go sign up, and of course, we'll see you guys next time.